All right, thanks everyone for attending the Letters of Evaluation presentation this year. So we're going to talk about different types of letters of evaluation that you can get and apply to doctoral programs with. And then we're going to go over what our deadlines and requirements are, who you should think about asking, and the process for asking people. So a little bit about ideas for asking people. I am going to start with the stuff that's maybe a little less exciting, talking about the types of letters and our requirements. I'm going to go through that part a little bit faster. I am going to email you these slides, and all of this information is on our website, so I'll trust that you guys can read this over. And I'd rather focus a little bit more on who do you ask for letters and how do you ask for letters than our policies and rules. So, the different types of letters. Now, this is the types of letters that you can have submitted as a part of your application. So there are three different ways that you can apply. You can either apply with a committee letter, a letter packet, or individual letters. We hope that you will apply with a committee letter. That's going to give you the best advantage for most applicants in their application. For folks who miss a deadline but still have all of the required letters, you can still receive a letter packet. And then for folks who don't have the required letters, or maybe for folks who have been out of school for over 3 years, who feel like maybe a committee letter or a letter packet is not the best way to package their credentials, you can apply directly. So have the letters uploaded directly and not come through the pre-health office. And that is an option that makes sense for for some applicants, and that's certainly something that we're happy to talk to you about. That typically works best for either folks who, like I said, graduated several years ago and feel like their work experiences are a greater part of who they are now than their academic experiences, or for folks maybe who have transferred and don't have the required number of letters from Northeastern, or feel like they have strong mentors from other programs that they would really want to be a part of their letters. So the way that our letters work, a committee letter from Northeastern includes the full content of all the letters that you submit to us. So we require 3 faculty letters, 2 of which have to come from science faculty. The third is your choice. All of these letters do need to be from Northeastern faculty, or I should say faculty who have taught you at Northeastern. So if a faculty member has left Northeastern and is now teaching somewhere else, we will accept a letter from them. So 3 Northeastern faculty letters. We require a clinical letter, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. And then we allow up to 2 additional letters. If you qualify for a committee letter, you'll also have a letter from the pre-health program. And in our committee letters, we include all of these letters. So we include the full text of the faculty letters and PDF copies of the external letters. For a committee letter, you do have to meet all of our deadlines and requirements. Letters have to be submitted to us through MAP, and that is something that's really important to be aware of as an applicant, that you should never touch the letters. And by touch, physically, you're not necessarily going to touch them. Electronically, you should not touch them. And that's because, unfortunately, there are people out there, not you guys, but other people out there who will write their own letters and submit them as if they were the person, which is really obviously an unfortunate thing, but you never want it to be able to be in question if the letter came from you or if it came from your letter writer. So you do have to be a little bit careful with that. That's why we have the letters submitted directly from your letter writer uploaded through the MAP system. Now, if for some reason you've missed a deadline, you can still qualify for a letter packet, and those letter packets are exactly the same as the committee letter, except instead of an evaluation from us, it includes a cover sheet that says, this applicant missed a deadline, or if you choose not to get a committee letter from us for some reason. We don't recommend choosing not to, but sometimes applicants feel like actually there's a good reason for that. Maybe the set of schools that you're applying to just really doesn't require committee letters. And that's something, again, you can have a conversation with us about. We do require that you meet all of the conditions in the letter packet applicant agreement, just not the deadlines. And again, the letters must be submitted to the pre-health program through the MAP system. If you're not going to be able to get all of the required letters, so if you're not going to be able to get 3 faculty letters, a clinical letter, if you're going to apply directly, if you're going to have your letter writers send letters directly to the application service, you can have individual letters submitted. Those letters would not be sent to us through MAP. MAP and the AMCAS or the application services don't talk to each other. So you would just have your letter writers send them directly to the letter service or to the application service. And that's something to be aware of. We will not upload incomplete packets. So if you don't have the 4 required letters, we will not upload that as a letter packet. We'll require you to have your letter writers upload those letters individually. And some applicants do, for whatever reason, choose to do that. If you apply with something that's not a letter, not a committee letter, many of the schools will ask you why you're not applying with a committee letter, because they do know that Northeastern writes committee letters, and so they'll be curious why you don't have one. And if they ask you that, you want to have a reason. I mean, sometimes there is a reason that makes sense, and that's fine, but they may ask you that. So this is a list of our deadlines. This is also in the applicant agreement. I feel like we've been over this a lot. Our first deadline is coming up. The applicant agreement and the self-assessment are due on January 31st. Just a reminder for folks who are taking that January MCAT, don't wait until after your January MCAT to start your self-assessment. You'll feel sad. March 15th is when these letters are due. So the 3 internal letters and the clinical letter must be in on March 15th. We don't require that the 2 additional letters be in on March 15th because they're optional letters. I strongly, strongly recommend that you have those letters in then, because you're not going to want to be worrying about letters later. The letters part can be kind of stressful for applicants because it is out of your control. So getting it in for March 15th, getting everything in is really in your best interest. The one exception to that is if, let's say you're on co-op now and you're going to be getting a letter from your co-op PI, you may want to wait until closer to the end of your co-op experience to ask for that letter of recommendation, or you've started a new experience of some sort in January, and you feel like, you know what, I just want to wait a little bit longer. This is one of my 2 optional letters that I don't need, so I'm going to have the letter come in after that. April 15th is the last day to request a committee letter interview, and to request a committee letter interview, all of MAP has to be filled out. And I know I've said this before, but just a reminder, make sure that if you're taking an April MCAT, you fill out your MAP portfolio sooner rather than later, because you're not going to want to be filling out that MAP account while you're studying for the MCAT. The last day So we do our committee letter interviews. We start doing them in March. So you can request it before April 15th. April 15th is the last day. It is not the day. The last day to have your committee letter interview is May 15th. So we finish the committee letter interviews. We don't write the committee letters until later, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So we've gone through this before. Our required letters, 3 faculty letters. The faculty letters must represent a class or directed study in which a grade was earned. You can't get a letter from a TA and no 1-credit courses, so not intro to co-op or intro to college. If you took a lab class and you had a TA that you really got along great with and you feel like could speak to what you did in your lab, it's fine when you're talking to the professor. Maybe you talk to the professor who you took the lecture with and say, you know, I had a really great relationship with the TA. Maybe the TA can contribute to that letter of recommendation, so you may be able to get their opinion in there in that way. For the external letters, at least one letter must be submitted by a practitioner in the field to which you're applying. That has to represent a clinical setting in the U.S. within the last 18 months. So if you're applying to MD and DO programs, we require an MD letter for the MD programs and a DO letter for the DO programs. And that's something that's very important. For the DO programs, they do not want to be a backup option for you. So if you're applying to DO schools, you really need to take the time to do the research and make sure that this is what you're interested in doing. And so that DO letter is really very important. And one other thing, in terms of who you're asking for the letters, we say on here the practitioner may not be a relative. You really want to be careful about asking somebody who's known you your entire life. I read all of the letters, and I can tell you I've read some letters that are like, oh, he was such a cute baby. He had really cute blonde hair. We used to spend summers on the Cape together. She was an awesome skier. That is not what you want your letter to say, right? You want your letter to say, she was really great in the clinical setting. She asked amazing questions. He came back to the next shadow day, having read up on the conditions that we saw, and really having gained knowledge from what we did. He was obviously enthusiastic about my patients. Patients felt comfortable around him. So really think about if, for those clinical letters, making sure that, you're not going with somebody who's too close to you personally, but somebody who's going to write you a really objective letter. Again, if you miss a deadline or do not choose to request a committee letter, we can do a letter packet for you. And then individual letters, again, you would not request those through MAP. Make sure that if you decide to go with individual letters, you understand the letter requirements through that the schools are looking for. So you're going to want to research the different schools that you're applying to. If you're applying with a committee letter, they're just going to accept our committee letter. So who should you ask? For internal letters, we really strongly recommend one science faculty who taught you in a lab class, one professor from your major, a professor from outside of your major. The admissions committees really want to see evidence of your academic ability to feel that confident that you can handle the rigor of the program that you're applying to. So they don't want to see, for example, 3 letters from biology, because they want to know, okay, well, is this person good at more than biology? We do accept letters from the behavioral and neuroscience faculty who teach in biology-based classes. They're classified as in the psychology department, but if you're getting one of those faculty members, you probably also want to try and get somebody who taught you in a lab science to show them that you do well in classes that are exactly like what you would be taking in the medical school program. For college's science students, a lot of the schools want to see that you are successful in classes that are not science classes. So if you can get a non-science letter, possibly from your advanced writing professor or from a sociology class, so somebody in the arts and sciences or humanities or social sciences and humanities, that's a really good idea. If you were a non-science major, like your health science or engineering, I would definitely recommend getting a letter of recommendation from somebody from your major, because a lot of the schools do want to see that you have a letter of recommendation from somebody from your major. For the external letters, again, we require the clinician letter. I would really strongly recommend that you have a research letter if you've done research. So for most folks, 5 letters is going to be a good number. If you have done research, I would definitely recommend asking your research PI for a letter. If you did research and you didn't really get to know your research PI that well, maybe you worked under a graduate student or a postdoc, what a lot of researchers will do is the postdoc or the graduate student will write the letter and the PI will sign off on it. So you'll have 2 signatures on that letter, and that's something that PIs are often happy to do. It's frequently the case that they know of you and that they understand, oh yeah, there was somebody in a lab and they helped my postdoc. Um, and so having the big name person sign off on it, but having the person who actually knows you write the letter is often the way to go. And I would recommend, if you're thinking that that might be a good option for you, that you talk to the postdoc and say, what do you think about this? And do you think this is something that could potentially work out? You also, if you are working, let's say you're in a gap year now, you're doing a couple gap years, you probably want your work supervisor. Um, a co-op supervisor is a good idea. If you've done a clinical co-op and your immediate supervisor was a nurse practitioner or a physical therapist, they're also a good person to ask for a letter. So when you're thinking about who to ask for letters, you really want to think about building sort of a portfolio of letters. So you don't want every single letter to say the exact same thing about you. You want people who are going to talk about you from different angles and different aspects of your personality and your abilities. So rather than having 2 researchers who are going to say the same exact thing about you, you may feel like I could be better off having one researcher and somebody who spent a lot of time with me in my community service. So you kind of want to think about that balance in terms of letters. Now, that said, a lot of you guys have a ton of experiences and you're not going to be able to get a letter from every single experience, and that is just fine. So don't feel like you need to have a letter from every experience that, and every activity that you've been involved with. So yeah, I did say MD and DO applicants need 2 clinical letters. MD PhD applicants need 2 research letters. If you're applying for MD PhD programs, they do want to see letters from all of your research PIs, and that's something you probably want to come in and talk to me about. If you if you have more than 2 research PIs, that's probably something that you want to discuss. So, question, if you have spent time shadowing your PI, can they write you a letter as a clinician and a PI? Yes, absolutely. They would write a letter and talk about clinical and PI, and that's great. That's kind of a twofer, which is nice. And a lot of our really good letters do come from folks who have spent time shadowing a PI, because they really get to know you well, and they see how you are able to translate what you've been doing in research into the clinic, which is helpful. So let's talk a little bit about process. Before you actually ask for the letter, you really want to do some thinking about how you're going to articulate your goals. Think about, okay, why am I doing this? Why do I want to go to medical school? Because you really want to talk to them about, you know, why are you applying? What's important to you about being a doctor? Why are you asking them specifically? So what about their class or their experience has drawn you to medicine? Some evaluators want to see a copy of your transcript, your resume, your personal statement. Their job is not really to reiterate your resume, so they don't necessarily need to know everything about you. Their job is to talk about the little slice of you that they do know really well. It doesn't hurt, though, to have a copy of your resume just to be able to give that to them. So you do want to come prepared to a meeting. There is also a brochure, and I'll send you a link to that brochure that from AAMC that talks about what are the schools looking for in letters. And that's a really good thing to bring. It's a brochure for letter writers. Some of the faculty, like the science faculty, don't need it because they've written a whole lot of letters. But if you're talking to a faculty member, like a music professor who may have never written a letter of recommendation for medical school before, you're definitely going to want to bring it. When in doubt, just bring the brochure along, print it off, and bring it out. And like I said, I will include that in the, the email that I send. So the first step that you want to do is kind of request an appointment to talk to them. So what I would recommend, so that you're not going to a meeting sort of blind and, going in and talking to them about the letter, all nervous about it, is just email the person that you want to talk to and say, I'm wondering if I can set up an appointment to talk to you about a letter of recommendation for medical school. And that way, or for dental school or podiatry school or whatever you're applying to, that way, that gives them the opportunity to say, oh, thank you for asking. I'm not actually sure I would be the best person to write that letter. Hopefully they're not going to say that. It's pretty rare for somebody to say that. But, you know, usually what they're going to say is, oh, yes, I'd be happy to set up that appointment with you. That way, if they agree to set up the appointment with you, you know that they're open to writing a letter of recommendation for you. And so you can go into the meeting a lot more confident, understanding that you're still going to have to talk about, this is my goals, this is why I want to be a health professional. Talking about the importance of their support and your appreciation and all that, but knowing they're probably going to be happy to write you this letter because otherwise they just wouldn't have taken the meeting, right? So the things that you are going to want to talk about, you're going to want to remind them of where you knew them from, remind them of what you did in their class, remind them, talk a little bit, again, your goals, a little bit about what you're thinking of in your career. So talk a little bit about what makes you interested in medicine, what you're hoping to do with your medical career, what you're thinking of in terms of where you want to go, just general information about your next steps forward, your understanding of the process, and really your appreciation to them for writing the letters. You do want to explain to them the letter of evaluation process so that they're going to be clear on that. And I'm going to go over that with you in just a second. Make sure that they're aware of the deadlines, and the deadline again is March 15th. And then also just make sure to thank them. This is an extra thing that people do, and they're typically happy to do it because obviously they want to support you. They didn't go into education because of the money. That's for sure. They went into it because they like to mentor people and they like to help you achieve their goals. And so let them know that you appreciate their efforts. So the way that you will request your letter of recommendation, and you'll tell them that this is what you're going to do, is after the meeting, after they've agreed to write you a letter, you're going to go into your MAP account, and all letters will be requested through the MAP account. You're going to go to the letters of evaluation section, and you're going to enter their information in. So there's a different way to enter information for internal letters and external letters. For internal letters, you're going to pull up the information on, it's going to pull up only folks who you've had for classes. And it's going to give you instruction, or you're just going to put their contact information, put their email information. Double check their email, please, because it is really difficult. If you put the wrong email address in, you're going to have to email me to update that email address. It's not going to let you email. It's not going to let you change that. And that's just going to take you time, and it's going to be stressful. So once you put that information in and you submit it, then the MAP system is going to send an email to that address that you put in MAP to that address with a letter request. And the letter request it's going to have a letter information. It's going to say, thank you for agreeing to write a letter for this applicant. These are the things that we're looking for. This is our deadline. And there's going to be a link at the bottom. When they click that link, it's going to allow them to upload a letter directly to MAP. So they just click on the link that comes in the letter and they upload a letter directly. If there are problems with it, they should contact me, or you can contact me. Now, again, don't request the letters unless you're confident that you'll be able to obtain the full set of required letters. We will not forward an incomplete set of letters. We will tell you that you need to go back to your letter writers and have them send them directly. It will also ask you about FERPA, if you waive your right to view the letters, or if you don't waive your right to view the letters. We really strongly recommend waiving your right to the letter. I know everybody wants to read their letters, and it's tough to waive your rights to letters, but there is a perception among admissions folks that if you don't waive your letters, number one, the letter writers aren't going to be as honest, and number two, you may be doing what's called letter shopping. Letter shopping is when you get more letters than are required, and then you just cherry pick the best letters. So you might be screening things out, and then they're going to take those letters a little bit less seriously because they're going to think, oh, well, what did the letter that they didn't get say? So there's always a little bit of a raised eyebrow. It among the admissions committee, if you didn't waive your rights to those letters. It's obviously your choice, but we really strongly recommend waiving your rights to the letters. If somebody, it's very, very, very rare for somebody to not write a good letter. In fact, I always wish that you guys could see your letters because they're way better than you would imagine. Typically, they're incredible. And if somebody wants to kind of not help you or hurt your application, they're just going to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't write you a letter. Why are they going to spend time writing you a letter that's not going to help their application? That is extra effort for them. And there are very few people who are that petty and vengeful that they're going to spend their time doing something to hurt you right? So we recommend just waiving those rights. That's the long and short of it. Okay. So in terms of process within MAP, once um, the letter request is sent to the evaluator from MAP, its MAP status becomes sent. So in MAP, you'll see that the letter request was sent. Once the letter comes into MAP, it will say the status changes to waiting for verification. So the letters have to be waiting for verification by March 15th. That's the status that's required on March 15th. Letters have to be in. Now, I read and review every letter and make sure that it's correct. So we make sure here that they got your name correct. If you're if you're male, they said he, and if you're female, they said she. That the external letter writers put their letters on letterhead, they put the correct date on it, they signed it, that nobody said you went to Northwestern. So all of these important little details, we read over all the letters and just make sure that everything is correct. So it does take a little bit of time to do that. Once the letter is reviewed for accuracy, the status is changed to verified. So it does take a little bit of time, and sometimes if there's a mistake on the letter, it will take a little bit more time. If there's a mistake on the letter, typically we email the letter writer and say, hey, it looks like you forgot to sign your letter. Would you mind just adding a signature and emailing it back? And usually the letter writers are like, oh my goodness, I'm sorry. Thank you for letting me know. Here's the signed letter. Usually that takes a day or two. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer because they're busy people. So sometimes that can delay your letter being verified. If we don't hear back from them within a week or so, we'll send a follow-up email. And then if we don't hear back from that, usually I'll get in touch with you directly and say, hey, your letter isn't signed. Can you just ask your letter writer to resubmit a signed copy of the letter? We're not going to deny you a committee letter because your letter writer forgot to sign their letter, but we need a signed letter for a committee letter. The schools are not going to accept an unsigned letter as part of your application. That's not a thing. Okay, so in terms of next steps with the letters as a part of the committee letter, between when your letters arrive, and some letters do come in before March 15th, you're going to request a committee letter interview only after the letters have been marked as verified, you've completed your MAP profile, including a final draft of your personal statement and a list of your top 10 schools. You don't need to include the REACH schools on that list, include the schools that are kind of your MAP schools, and you have to have your committee letter interview by May 15th. Now, I would like to add that April 15th is not the day to request a committee letter interview. It is the last day to request a committee letter interview. And another thing on this March 15th, as I'm talking about, it's not the last day, faculty and letter writers frequently are just like students in terms of their timeline for submitting letters, and this is something that winds up being kind of stressful for folks, and I just kind of like to warn people a little bit ahead of time. The bulk of our letters do come in those first 2 weeks of May, and so you do have to be a little bit prepared for the fact that your letters may not be in until right up towards the deadline. That is very commonly what happens. People put those things off. That does not mean that they're not going to write the letters. It is out of your control, and that is hard, and we understand that. But really, you kind of have to trust in the people who you've asked to write letters. If you ask somebody for a letter in October, or you ask for a letter in January, it's definitely perfectly appropriate on March 1st or the very beginning of March to say, hey, thanks again for send them an email or talk to them and say thanks again for agreeing to write my letter. I really appreciate it. And just a reminder that's due on March 15th. Just to remind them, you know what, that deadline is coming up. It's not appropriate to say that 6 times, okay? They're not going to want to hear it, and that's going to annoy them. A reminder March 5th, March 1st or so, if it's not in, and then another reminder maybe a week later is fine. If March 14th comes along and the letter is still not uploaded, it's fine to just send them a little thing saying, I'm sure you're doing this, but I just want to double check and make sure it's going to be okay. 3 reminders that's a lot. So you really don't want to send them more than that. So yeah, definitely pace yourself on those reminders. Don't send them too many. It's okay to send them a couple because people do forget. So we have a question. When you say the final draft of our personal statement is due, should we be updating should you be updating us if we change it before June 1st? So it's a final draft. It is not going to be your final personal statement. We will probably give you feedback on your personal statement at the committee letter interview. The more complete your personal statement is at the committee letter interview, the more feedback we can give you. If you've just thrown something in there, we're not going to have much to give you feedback on. So you are welcome to check in with us again before you apply. It's your application. We don't have to approve your personal statement, right? But we are happy to read that over again. We're going to give you feedback, and it's not going to be useful if it's not in there and well done. And nothing drives me more crazy than looking at a student's application and reading over a personal statement and saying, what were they doing there? And having 5 recommendations that I feel I could give somebody had they had that personal statement in or had they asked me about it before they applied. So we want to avoid that. We want to avoid me reading a personal statement and saying, oh, I should have, I wish I had had the opportunity to make this recommendation to you before you applied. Okay, after May 15th. This is a little bit more about our committee letter process. So we don't actually write any of our committee letters until after you apply, until you have an entrance exam score and you apply. So the reason for that is we are a small program. There aren't a lot of us here in the pre-health office. We want to spend our time writing letters for folks who are definitely applying. So we're going to focus our time and attention on the folks who have applied. We're also going to look at what you have on your application itself when we're writing your letter. I don't want to refer to something that you decided, you know what, I'm not putting this on my application. Or if you decide to make a last minute change in your personal statement, I don't want to talk about something that I have in a draft of your personal statement that you decided to change. So we're going to need a copy of your submitted application before we write the committee letter. So the first thing that you're going to do, you're going to fill out your application in May or June if you're a dental student, or August if you're a podiatry student. As soon as you submit it, you're going to download a copy of that application, upload a date time stamp copy to MAP, and then you're going to email whoever did your committee letter interview and say, I've applied. And you'll get more information about this. This is not the only time I'm going to tell you this. Once that happens, we will put you in the queue to write your committee letter. We write them pretty much in the order that you've notified us that you've submitted your applications. Letter packets are also uploaded in the approximate order in which you notify us you've submitted your application. So we're not going to jump over all the committee letter folks to upload a letter packet the second it's submitted. Committee letters are composed of the following format. And again, like I said, I'm gonna send you like a couple emails as we get closer, reminding you of that. So you'll know the process as we get closer, and we'll talk about it at the committee letter interview also. Our Northeastern committee letters include the following. There's a cover sheet that introduces Northeastern. Next comes the letter of evaluation that's written by whoever conducts your committee letter interview. Then there's the faculty letters. So we do not do a full PDF copy of the faculty letters. Instead, we do what are called comments. So we include name, degree, title, department of the faculty member, and the full text of what they have written. There's no signature, there's no date. It's on pre-health letterhead as opposed to their department letterhead. And then we do full PDF copies of the external letters. So so the schools will get all of the text of everything that everybody wrote, and they'll know exactly who wrote what and how they connected with you. Everything is combined into one PDF. That's the committee letter. Typically, they're about 7 to 8 pages long, so they're pretty extensive, pretty long to do. They're big. We then upload that committee letter directly to your application. So, and we'll talk about this more, excuse me, as the application comes out. But that committee letter is just going to be attached to your application. You'll see it uploaded as a part of your application. So in 2006, so last year, we did change the format of our committee letter a little bit based on a panel of 5 admissions deans. So we added a cover page that explains our deadlines, our process, our requirements. It talks a little bit about Northeastern, a little bit about the co-op program. The cover page, like I said, it explains the co-op program. It also talks about summer classes and summer class rigor. The cover page, we have a cover page for letter packets that states on the cover page, for the letter packets, it states why you're getting a letter packet as opposed to a committee letter. And that's something that we decided to do based on feedback of the deans. Typically, people are getting a letter packet because they missed a deadline. And so we want the schools to know it's just a missed deadline. It's not that we are unwilling to write you a committee letter, because if they see a letter packet, we don't want them thinking, oh, this person did something unethical and we're just not comfortable writing them a letter packet. And then the other thing is that the deans all express that they like letters that give a lot of information in a short space. If you think about it from the school's perspective, if they're receiving 12,000 applications, they don't want superfluous letters. So they want to know who you are and information about you. They don't want to read 3 letters that say exactly the same thing. What do they want to know? They want to know who you are. They want to know about your life story, distance traveled, resilience, how you react to struggles, uniqueness, academic rigor. They want to know about the activities, how you've spent your time. If you have any institutional actions or disciplinary matters, and that's something that you do kind of want to bring up with us during your committee letter interview. If you have any institutional actions or disciplinary measures, sometimes we get an application and I see, oh, wait, this person wrote on their application about something that I'm like, wait, what? It's for me, when I'm writing a committee letter and I see something on the application and I haven't heard about it before, it makes me have to think about, okay, how am I going to frame this? So it's better to have already discussed it. That's something that's kind of important. So a couple more questions that we have here. So for all of the question is letters are not written until after you submit. We submit on June 1st. Not until after that can we notify you to write the letter. That is correct. For all of the fields, we don't write the letters until after you submit your application. We can't upload the letters until you submit. Um, the way the application process works, the schools don't get your application the day that you submit. And actually for MD programs, the schools don't get the applications until the end of June. We're pretty neurotic about how fast we write our letters. So for folks who submit in that first week, all of those letters are typically attached to the applications before the admissions folks get get the applications. So there is time between when you submit and when the school receives the letters. And then second question here is about with the cover page from the post-bac program, does it talk about that if you weren't an undergrad student here? No, we'll talk about that individually in the letter because being a post-bac student, it's not really about the post-bac. We'll talk more about your journey as opposed to the fact that you were in a post-bac program because that's what's more important. They don't necessarily care that you did a post-bac program. They care more about your journey to becoming to the point where you're applying to medical school. So a few final notes. We recommend that you request all letters before the end of January. And I can tell you that if your letter, for whatever reason, is not in on March 15th, and we look at the date that you requested it, and it's March 7th, I'm going to say, well, you just requested this letter a week ago. I'm not surprised it's not in. Whereas if I look at your letter request and you requested it January 15th and it's not in, I'm going to be a little bit more sympathetic and I'm going to say, okay, is something going on with this letter writer? What's happened here? Do you have an email trail that shows that you've been in contact with this person, that they agreed to write the letter? That's going to make the pre-health office a lot more sympathetic if there's a late letter. Whereas if you put in that letter request, a week before, we're not going to have a lot of sympathy if you miss the deadline. Do not stalk your letter writers. It's not going to help you. As I said, a friendly reminder a couple of weeks before is definitely a good idea if your letters are not in. Um, another letter, another reminder, if you don't hear back from them, realize that they are going to write it if they said they would write it. And they may very well write it the evening before at 9 p.m. And that's just the same as if they wrote it February 5th. Be sure to thank your letter writers and keep in touch with them when you receive interviews and acceptances, particularly for folks who write a lot of letters. It's kind of demoralizing if you write letters and then you never hear if somebody got in. When you go out of your way and do something else, something extra and something nice to help somebody, and then you never find out what happened, it can be a little sad. And I can tell you that the letter writers really appreciate it. They like to know, wow, I did this for somebody, and this was the outcome, and that's really great. So please really do keep in touch with them. Send them a quick thank you. They really like those handwritten thank you cards, I gotta say, that just express that, this has been a goal of mine for a really long time, and I'm here because of you. Um, and just a final note that letters sent to our office can only be used for the purpose which they were submitted. We don't send letters to PA programs or medical master's programs, and that's because the letter writers are sending us the letters with their signatures on them for a specific purpose. So since they've signed the letters, we don't get to decide what else they recommend you for. They've only recommended you for medical programs. They haven't recommended you for PA programs. So you do have to go back to those letter writers for, for a letter for those things. One final note, you may only request letters that you plan to use. You can't pick and choose letters after they've been written. They are a lot of work for people to write, and it's not fair to letter writers to get letters that aren't going to be used. So really make sure that if you're asking for a letter, it's going to be a letter that you're going to want to use, because we are going to require that you use it. Because it's not fair to our letter writers. This is a link below to the letters website, and I will include, that in the email that I send to you guys. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about any of this information. I know it's a fair amount of stuff. I will be posting the YouTube of this on the website and sending out the slides. And just sending you information about our next set of workshops. I'm also going to be sending out later today our latest newsletter, so definitely keep an eye out for that. It's got big information in it that you're definitely going to want to read over. And it's also got my notes from the dean's visits, if you weren't able to attend those, and from the MCAT panel, from when we had students in talking about the MCAT exam. I took notes on all of that. So if anybody has any questions, definitely feel free to type those into the chat feature. So, and I will answer any questions that you may have. Anyone with questions? I think I'm going to pause the recorder and the recording. So thank you to anybody who is listening to the YouTube, and I look forward to seeing you guys when you are. Okay. If you postpone your application after requesting, oh, actually, you know what? That's a really great question.